Thank you very much. Let her in. We have Simon Seaback Montefiore, who was in fact a merchant banker before whom I engaged. He was absolutely hopeless. So I'm delighted that he's changed his profession into a professional writer, and delighted that he's extremely successful, and he writes a lot about Russia, Potemkin, Stalin, Catherine, and very glamorously last month Angelina Jolie has optioned his book on Catherine and is going to turn it into a movie, so he's going to be even more famous than he already is. So Simon is, I'm delighted to be in Hong Kong. And Alain de Botton, whose father I've known for many, many years, a great entrepreneur in the financial world, and so I've known
writing, why we do it, its purpose, etc. in 5 minutes. I mean, my opening point is really, if there are any parents in the audience, please make sure that your children don't become writers. Certainly that's the message that comes from the media, which is full of weirdos and perverts and losers. It's when we move over to literature that we realise, it wouldn't occur to anyone to call Hamlet a loser, or Oedipus the king a weirdo. And the reason, or Emma Bovary, a shopaholic adulteress, because we don't use these crude descriptions when we're referring to the tragic heroes and heroines of literature, because one of the things that writing does is to lend complexity to situations which are always in danger of being quashed and reduced and caricatured. It's an anti-caricature mechanism. Things that are normally hastily quashed find themselves returned to their true sort of dimensions. Writing is a wonderful way of taming anxiety. If you're worried about things, I always tell people, just write it down on a piece of paper and see where you get to.
One day he said to me, I'm going to go and address my followers from the balcony. And he went out, as he went out to the balcony, I said, Mr. President, would you mind? My mother doesn't know where I am, and there's a war going on here. Would it be okay if I rang my mother from your phone? Because in those days there were very few mobile phones, so I had to ring from his desk. He said, sit at my desk, please, sit at the President's desk. So I sat at the President's desk, and I phoned my mother. The first thing my mother said was, sounds like Hitler's making a speech from the balcony outside. I said,
sorry, before I ask Simon, can I very courteously tell all the photographers who have now snapped at least 20,000 shots that they might retire and enjoy the forum.
Things about works of art, a theatre, piece of theatre or a film, when actually suddenly the whole hall is weeping. And they're weeping because they're realising at some level that everyone is suffering from the same thing. And then there's a terrific opportunity, as it were, to hold hands and cry together or celebrate together. But we live in very, very atomised societies where on the whole you don't share secrets, you don't share fears. We live as isolated units. And that's where art in general has an enormous role to play in reminding us of a shared humanity that doesn't otherwise normally get airtime except between the pages of a book or sometimes in a film.
Carol, have you anyone whose secret you'd like to know?
I'm still digesting the tantalising image from Simon, beautifully described, of a guilt-free Stalin. Quite incredible, Simon. Thank you very much. Looking back in history, I think John F. Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis I'd like an X-ray vision on, because it was such a saga of brinkmanship. And who blinked first and that sort of thing. I wouldn't mind the inside info on that.
All right, well, one of them is still alive, so you have a fair chance. But Mozart, they all composed to live on, so that's right. So even though I didn't really understand your question, it was an excellent question. Yes.
Hi, sort of a follow-up to the reader feedback question, but and this is sort of an extreme example as well. But when you have this phenomenon of writers like George R.R. Martin, and they have sequels coming out, and readers are then guessing the plot line of and he's the questions come up whether he has to then change the plot line to keep the element of surprise and mystery for his future books. Do you see that happening with more and more authors, given how much connectivity there is between you and the reader now? Have you had that experience yourself?
Well, that's another question I can't understand, but I'm sure it's an excellent question, asked by your incredibly fast American accent.
If I don't know who George Martin is, I'll hand that over to you.
George Martin. George Martin isn't he the presario of the Beatles?
No. I don't know, but I know that you're wrong. He's a writer.
What's a George Martin?
Yes, it is George Martin.
Not the one R.R. Martin, who's obviously somebody else.
Who the hell is George R. Martin? Stop trying to impress us with obscure writing.
Trying to show off how highbrow we are.
All right, next question. Going in a joke. This is Hong Kong, for God's sake.
It's always an extension. You know how it is when you read someone's diary. Most diaries are unpublishable because they're minus all the stuff that you would only write if somebody else was reading it. And I think that if my book sales collapsed and no one was interested, I would always continue to write for myself, but in that more abbreviated, telegraphic, sometimes to others entirely incoherent form, which is the essence of writing for oneself.
Can I just add, not everyone in the world loves his or her job, but they stick with it in order to pay the rent. And I think in some ways, writers are probably pretty much the same.
But her point is that if your books did not sell at all, so you can't even depend on that.
Indeed, you might pack it in.
Then you might pack it in, yes. What a stupid question. Right, okay. There are quite a lot of hands, so let's have one with a white shirt.
Apologies to present company.
You didn't disappoint, thank you. No, I mean, it's weird. Socrates believed that anyone who thinks for themselves, rationally and independently, deserves the title of philosopher. He says that very clearly in the book of his called the Meno. Everyone who thinks rationally is a philosopher. So I would imagine, let's be flattering, 98% of you here are philosophers.
So we get a bit irritated when somebody comes along and say, well, I can understand this, and we know that they don't really. But Alain is right. Philosophers themselves and professional philosophers don't do themselves justice. I remember before you started writing philosophy, there was a man called Brian McGee who was a professor of philosophy, and he was determined to popularize philosophy. And he put on BBC Two, I don't know whether you remember, a program called Philosophy. And the whole point was that he wanted to make sure that people related to philosophy. He failed miserably, as Alain has succeeded beautifully. But I remember the first program, and it was built up to be every man's philosophy. So I switched on the television, and he was interviewing Professor Hare from Cambridge University as the first program of 12 that was supposed to debunk this idea that philosophy is incomprehensible. So he asked him the first question on the first episode of this first series. He said, Professor Hare, why should we be moral? And I was holding onto my chair, and the camera panned over to Professor Hare. And he thought for a moment, and then he said, well, it depends what you mean by why. And at that moment, I knew it's lost. Now, you see there is a shining example of the difference between a philosopher and a writer. He's taken 7 minutes to answer that question. And the gist of the answer is that agony is neither a necessary nor sufficient condition.
Bits as well about self-recognition and the formation of identity through the words of others.
We should, of course, commend Anatomy of Melancholy, which I've tried to read 10 times, but I've never...
The best bit is the title. The best bit is the
title, yes, the 2-volume, heavy volumes.
Can I venture to suggest to Alan that these days tortured souls go on social media? They hit Twitter with venom. How valuable do you think their thoughts are?
I mean, venom, no. I mean, I think the melancholy ones lurk back, they're introverts, they don't say very much. They'll try one tweet, then it frightens them, somebody answers them back. I think the melancholy introverts are on the sidelines of social media.
Nothing about writing. Pass your microphone. Carry on.
To become a successful writer seems like to become a successful entrepreneur, the chance is quite slim. So everyone is inspired to. Sorry?
The secret is by what?
No.
Training.
Training.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice on people who aspire to become a writer? Like the advice to become
how to become a writer? Very boring question. Next question. Yeah, this one in the purple. Yeah, not the. Yeah. Okay. The girl. I mean, anybody who writes, how do you become a writer, or do you have writer's block? They are not questions which would be taken.
I shall hope this way. I have a question for all the panel. A lot of the answers have referred to the sort of transformative power of literature, but I note that you write non-fiction. So my question is, why do you write? Do you write fiction? And if not, why not?
They do write fiction.
These two write both fiction
Yes.
and non-fiction.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know that.
Right, for an ignorant question. Next. We want more people. I mean, do your homework before you come. Yes, okay, here. Very keen, Asian-looking man. Not Chinese, but not Guido either. That one. Very long hand. What nationality are you? Hong Kong.
That's a public school boy.
Public school boy, which?
Bedford School.
I see, all right, okay.
What
Carry
makes
on.
you English? What makes you English?
What makes what?
You English.
What makes you English?
No, I mean talking to you, David.
Me? What?
Yeah.
I'm not English, I'm Chinese.
But you...
Chinese boy. Next question, another ignorant question. Okay, we're going there. Thank you. No. We have a very dumb audience here.
It's like S&M here, right? Okay. This is a question for the panel. First is, when you write, do you want to change, to have some sort of change to everyone, or well, not everyone, to the world or to others? The reason why I ask these questions is because recently a book spoke to a local newspaper about that.
Book spoke to a newspaper. First of all, we got dumb questions, now we've got the articulate
No, it's
questions.
related to someone called Alain botton, because he said that one night after he returned to a conference in Bristol, and he had a dark moment of the soul. And then he said, basically the sad truth is that no matter how passionate you feel about a subject and you write about it, books don't change anything. And I want to ask Carol, Simon, and even Alain, that do you want to change anything when you write a book, or is purely expressive?
Right, I don't want to change anything. We did politics in my family. My mother was Britain's first female Prime Minister. And quite frankly, that's enough for one family. My dad, which my mum didn't read because she'd been married to the guy for 40 odd years. My brother read the index, thought he didn't get enough mentions and didn't bother either.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions. We've got time for a couple more questions. Yes, yes, you, man with the glasses. Yes, yeah. Can you give him a microphone?